You could take all the people avoiding tax, at a personal level here, and drop it in an ocean of the amount of money being avoided by corporations. But that's sort of slightly off the point. The point is, what have Eurosceptics done? That obviously is something for Gawain.
Firstly, trying to answer your question, yes. In simple terms, yes. For some of the reasons just been given, and I'll try and go into it. But yes, no, obviously. I think the point about the Eurobarometer, I don't know if you were here when I made the point about Eurobarometer dropping the question. Yes, it is. It's having that impact. It's having that impact in every country across the European Union without a shadow of doubt. In answer to Annette's point, I think to a certain extent the subtitle up there was slightly tongue-in-cheek. Just a little. When it was set up. It's this sort of, what have the Romans ever done for us type thing? Okay. Well, there are a few things. I suspect, for example, that counterintuitively, the fact that someone like Farage is quite good at his public speaking and his minor goes at Herman Van Rompuy or Barroso has popularised, without a shadow of doubt, the European Parliament across this continent and in America. The millions of hits on his YouTube from all over Europe, people are actually watching what's going on there. I mean, it is maybe not his desire, but it is actually an aspect of it. It has that spikiness provides an interest in what is essentially a very dull place, and you need interest for people to involve themselves in it. And for good or ill, I think that is something that maybe Eurosceptics have done for the EU. On the other points, the rise, for example, of Golden Dawn in Greece is truly scary. They reckon that 50% of Greek police voted for Golden Dawn in opinion polls in Greece. I mean, this is very, very worrying when you think of the combination of those two things. But I would suggest, agreeing again, it's most distorting, I would suggest that the austerity measures, the situation that we've all been discussing, is exacerbated by the European Union. Its dreams are foundering on the rocks of reality, and the way in which it is responding to a crisis is making it worse, and that drives people into, for want of a better term, into a much more tribal behaviour. If they cannot rely on the system, if they cannot rely on their betters, their politicians, their banks, their this, their that, the other, then they have to rely on each other. And they will cleave closer to those that are similar to them than to those that are different. It is just a fact of human nature, and you can't legislate it away. So if you create a situation where there is such suffering, and there is, then you are part of the reason for the rise in these very dangerous movements. And I would suggest that Euroscepticism and what we are trying to do in UKIP and the breaking down the monolithic block that is Europe will be beneficial when it comes to those things rather than damaging. I think driving in a, as I would say, anti-normal behaviour, trying to make everything the same, trying to have a single this and a single that and a single the other, goes against human nature as it is. Maybe not the perfected version, but as it is. And exacerbates the problems that you wish to see the back of, such as the various different hatreds that are bubbling under, particularly in Eastern Europe, but not just there, here as well, I agree. So I would suggest that Euroscepticism may save Europe from itself rather than make it worse.
Interesting.
I can honestly say that when we were putting this together, there was no tongue anywhere near cheek in the subtitle. It was a serious question. So I'll just make that representation on behalf of myself. There's a group of questions at the back here, gentlemen.
Thank you, James Hartnett. Now, to answer the question, what have Eurosceptics done for the EU? I think, certainly as someone who is a Eurosceptic, I'm not a member of UKIP, but I suspect Gawain and I would not find very much to disagree about. I would say, what has the EU let Eurosceptics do for it? And the answer is not very much. As Gawain mentioned, there is, I feel, a sort of shutters come down in the face of Eurosceptics. We're dismissed as anti-Europeans, xenophobes, and I found it interesting what the lady who asked the question a time ago said. She said that the UKIP presumably was campaigning for the destruction of the Parliament and everything it stands for. Well, maybe the destruction of the Parliament, but not everything it stands for. Because I think you'll find that, certainly on the Eurosceptic side, a lot of us would describe ourselves unquestioningly as Europeans, as pro-Europeans. We want Britain to be a positive part of Europe. We just don't think the EU is a constructive contribution towards that. So, unfortunately, because Eurosceptics haven't been listened to over the years and have been very much dismissed, and the EU has seemed to have, the believers in the EU have seemed to have a sort of the air of religious belief about it, and viewed Eurosceptics very much as heretics. Consequently, I think that has now driven public opinion, certainly in Britain, but also increasingly in other parts of the continent, to a level where belief in the EU as an expression of Europeanism is very damaged. And I think perhaps we have to ask now what we can, looking to a post-EU future, certainly for Britain, and possibly for other countries in Europe, and how we could play a part in that. And if I apologise, I know I'm going on a bit, but if you'll indulge me briefly by also addressing the economic side of things, it strikes me that there's a slight mirror between the credit bubble we had and also that there has been a positive effect from the EU in terms of democracy, the reaching out to the Eastern European states. That certainly was a positive contribution to democracy in Europe, and feelings of solidarity and European feeling across the continent. But the Euro crisis is now undermining that, and I feel that we're now looking back thinking, was this actually a democracy and solidarity bubble in the same way that there was a credit bubble? It was artificially inflated by the EU, and it may now burst, and we will see democracy and certainly solidarity is going backwards, and maybe democracy is too in places like Greece, and that's deeply concerning.
John Lloyd, I was a member of the Citizenship Education Working Party, working with the late Professor Sir Bernard Crick on introducing citizenship into schools, and the EU was one of the areas of knowledge and understanding that was written into that curriculum. However, a central plank of citizenship education in our schools is political literacy, which is actually about the engagement of people in society as a whole and in public affairs. And it seems to me that we have different ways of engaging in society and indeed in Europe. And I'm struck by the scepticism for both Europe and with our own politicians here in England and the UK in general. And Roger here spoke about the tyranny of the majority. I would prefer to talk about the tyranny of the minority. When you look at voting figures, we have a government elected by fewer than half of those who actually turned out at the last election, and I suspect even with the system of voting that we have for Europe, that fewer again elected those people who represent us in Europe. And as we saw in the election for the police commissioners, crime commissioners just last week, turnout was actually appallingly low. I would argue this doesn't matter a jot. What we need more than anything else in society at the moment are people who are genuinely political literate, who know what the issues are, who know how to engage, whether it's through Occupy or through UKIP or any other political party or organisation. But on top of that, we need people who are health literate and financially literate too. And until we have those things, I don't think actually we will have a fair or democratic society in which we can actually continue to debate these issues.
Anyone else like to?
Could you just do with these two?
Yeah, that's two.
Yeah, okay. So I'll come to you first. There has been, for sure, over the last, let's just say the beginning of the sort of 90s around there, a gradual decline in any faith that I think people have in politics or the political system. For me, and maybe it's just about the time at which I became aware of it, and I'm sure other people say it's been going on for years, but for me that the Blair government was this despicable cloak and dagger built on spin machine. And gradually throughout that time, certainly there I felt that there was a feeling of having pretty much no say in what's going on, having pretty much no idea of what is going on, and in that same time, throughout that parliament, they put through more law through the Commons and the Lords than had been put through in any prior 10-year period. What happens there is that essentially you are taking away people's sense of self-determination, responsibility, and community. And what then happens is that you start to see a lack of accountability. You tell people that they can't cross the road, sooner or later someone won't know how to. And if you take away that sort of engagement, that sort of feeling of engagement, then you're absolutely right. You will see that. We have seen apathy. I always refer to Blair as the architect of apathy. And since that time, it's just getting worse and worse. And there's no surprise that nobody turned out for the police commissioners thing. And when we think about who's sort of turned up for elections in the past, no surprise that we've seen a diminishing sort of participation in that sense. In terms of getting to know the issues, etc., absolutely, I'm all for that. Oh, by the way, just before you go, I'm very disappointed on what happened yesterday with the church and the votes.
So am I.
That's what a nightmare.
Devastating. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, and
Sorry,
part of what Occupy is doing is doing exactly that. Hence this little book that we wrote. It's called The Little Book of Ideas. It came out of a little sort of space that we had for a while called the School of Ideas, where some few of us got together and just talked about the various issues and the terminology associated with recession, etc., because we realised that nobody really had the time to educate themselves about what's going on. It's not that people don't have the capacity to understand, and this is really crucial, I think, because a lot of time, there will be a general sort of demeaning of people saying, oh, no, you could possibly understand this, have to leave it to professionals, your view is not valid, blah, 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 go away. And of course, that's what people are turning occupied to do, and I'm pretty sure that's what a lot of people feel. And when I was doing outreach over the summer in terms of at festivals, at events that we were hosting, I was amazed by the degree to which some of the kids, the 18, 19-year-olds, were able to talk about some of these complex subjects. And B, it was amazing how many times some people come up to me and say, I feel this, I feel it's not right, but I don't feel I can say it because I don't understand. So we do see this cloaking of all this world in terminologies, so you don't understand. Who knew that quantitative easing is basically printing money? All sorts of things are used to create some sort of mysticism around these issues and prevent people from engaging. So it's two things. Yes, people should want to engage. B, people should be given permission should be given the facts and allowed to understand what is going on. And that sort of comes from both levels. Just to pick up on what you were saying, I can understand how being seen as a Eurosceptic might get in the way of, and again, this is something that I'm sure Wayne will talk about, will get in the way of being seen as being constructive. I only say that on the basis that clearly in the first 3 months of Occupy, we were all considered as anti-capitalist, all of us. And you know, a lot of that comes about because actually someone stands up and just says, it doesn't seem to be working. And then 12 months pass, and there are umpteen examples of capitalism, or this form of it, or free market capitalism, or neoliberalism, or whatever way you want to talk about it, not functioning for everyone. So I can understand that you will get seen as just the one thing. It has to be said, for me, I think it's very easy for us to get caught up in whether it's being part of the EU or not being part of the EU is the reason. And I'm probably not, sufficiently up to speed on the mechanisms within the EU. But I would only suggest that for me, I think we don't want to become too infatuated by whether it's Brussels or whoever, when actually these problems, I don't think, really are a function of them happening in the EU. I do think that they're a function of the complete the malfunctioning of the current economic system, and essentially some pretty crass behaviour by the banking world.
Go on. James, thank you. James, the idea of a democracy bubble, entertaining conceit. There may be something in it. I'm not sure. I've thought of it like that, and I'll go away and ponder that one. Yes, I think it's overblown. And yes, I think there is a retreat from it. Whether one could make a proper simile or metaphor out of the credit bubble and the box bubble, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. On Mr. Lloyd's perspective, and yes, last week it was 15%, for the Euro elections, 2004 was 26%, I think national elections is 60%, local elections are 30s. Yeah, it's not good, is it? I know there's something I drum my bang on this sort of subject that I think has a relevance to what you're saying. Part of the citizenship course, as I understand, and worked with others, is the take a couple of sixth formers to Auschwitz week, where every sixth form in Britain has to send 2 people to Auschwitz to learn about how ghastly the Nazis were and how it is wrong to slaughter people on the basis of their whatever particular reason. I'm not a great fan, I have to say. I would prefer to spend the money sending more people to Runnymede. What is interesting about this country to an extent is, why didn't we become a dictatorship? Why didn't we do this ourselves? If every other country pretty well in Europe did go that way, and in many parts willingly take part in this ghastly slaughter. So the question mark to me is, given that the Great Depression happened to all of us, given the financial disaster of the 30s happened to everybody, why didn't this country go that way? And I'd take them to Runnymede and basically say, look at what is it about us, and how can we learn from this? If you forget that, maybe a Whiggish approach to history, the golden thread of liberty, the growth of liberty in this country, if you forget how that happened or why that happened, if you cease to learn it, and all you learn is the horrors of the 20th century in history, then you are much more, if you are only 15% voting for your PCCs, your police commissioners, the decisions of those people could be absolutely abhorrent, and nobody would have the right to complain because they didn't get off their backsides and vote against them or vote for somebody else that would have been better. And I worry very much the ignorance that you're talking about and the lack of engagement in the political sphere and the lack of knowledge. It isn't stupidity, it is ignorance, it is a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of teaching of these things. I do fear that that leads us open to the demagogue, the simple answer, as we were talking in the previous question from Annette, the blame somebody else, blame another group, blame this, that and the other. It becomes much more simple if you do not know why that isn't real. And I applaud the work that you did on the citizenship.
If I can just correct you though, the grant that the government gives for sixth formers to go to Auschwitz and so on is actually through the Holocaust Trust.
Education Trust. I know it's
actually
part
in
of
the context of the history of all that, and of course Moriarty. It contributes to a citizenship agenda, but it isn't
Yeah,
actually.
okay. But it seems to me you're getting the wrong end of the stick. Yes, we all know that was ghastly. In fact, if you go through school, you're taught about the dictatorships of the 20th century 4 or 5 times as you go through the 8, 9 years of school. But you're not. The why not is, I think, a much more important question in some ways. We all know how vile that was. So how is it that you don't do that again? Not just say it's nasty. And that seems to be a significant problem.
Thank you. I'm aware that our time is nearly up. I'd like to say thank you very much to both Tom and Gawain for their contributions. We nearly didn't mention the Nazis, but they got in there. Thank you very much for your contributions as well. I hope that you found it useful. I'd like to thank again the European Parliament for hosting us and providing us with all of the support.
Yeah, just to say, if anybody would like a copy of the little book that we published, which goes through all the terminology associated with the crisis, feel free to take it.
And if you feel like engaging in politics, there are opportunities literally at your doorstep. Thank you very much.